If you can make me co-host also, come. Why I am, I think, yeah.
Wow, 150 participants.
It's nothing.
Really?
Yeah.
How many do you normally get?
It will hit 200 very soon.
Yo,
okay. As soon as more people come in, we'll get to, hopefully, we'll get up to 200. Kamu, are we good to go? We still have more people coming in, still joining. See, there's still more people joining.
Just 1 minute, and then you can start.
Why don't you play the video for 2? How long is the video?
I know we had challenges with uploading the slides, so it's gonna be difficult to share the slides again.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sure, we still have more people logging in.
Yes, just 15 seconds, then you can start.
It's not going to stop.
All right, we're ready to go, Doc.
Okay, thanks, Kamu. Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to our Clinics Health Group weekly webinars. And we are excited to meet with you once more on a Thursday evening. Yes, we've been meeting for the last 2.5 years or so, since 2020. And it's been a wonderful time that we've spent with you as we invite quite a number of knowledgeable speakers, speakers from the academia, speakers from the various hospitals and public and private, who have been giving us talks on continuing medical education on topics of interest. And we appreciate some of you have been giving us some advices and comments about what topics to cover, and we request that you don't stop doing so. And this evening we continue with our webinars, CPD accredited webinars, as we have come to be known for, as thought leaders in medical education and good quality clinical practice. And note that this CPD webinars are CPD accredited. And so when you join in, please give us your full details as to whether we are the HPSSA, the Nursing Council, the Pharmacy Council, the Allied Health Professions Council, and provide your registration number, your email, and cell phone number, so that when we upload the information, this can be provided to the regulators, and you can get the requisite CPD certificate from time to time, as you shall be registering for these webinars. Just note that it is not necessary to post your details on the chat box, but well, it's fine if you're just creating friends and colleagues from across the country, just to say you're also part of this exciting program. It's okay. Note also that these webinars are streamed live on YouTube, so you are able to go back at your leisure to view the presentations and go through what you might have missed from the presentations as they were being presented live. So this evening, we're excited to bring one of the well-known clinicians around Soweto, Johannesburg, Wits University, Professor Reidwaan Ally, who graduated from the University of the Witwatersrand with a qualification and fellowship in the College of Physicians in 1986. And he was appointed as the adjunct professor of medicine in 2001. He's the current head of gastroenterology at Wits, and also principal physician and head of the medical unit at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. He's the director of the African Institute of Digestive Disease and past president of the South African Gastroenterology Society. His mission is to promote gastroenterology, as we are going to be listening to him this evening, as a dynamic scientific subspecialty, especially to the younger physicians, and to improve relations and needs between academia and private gastroenterologists. He has a special interest in maintaining this association with the South African chapter of the gastroenterology division as a center for training in gastroenterology within sub-Saharan Africa and encouraging industry, research and development. Professor Reidwaan Ally will be talking to us on iron deficiency, a paradigm shift. He has mentioned those qualifications. So it's a great pleasure to welcome him back also to the clinics fraternity, because he's been with clinics for a number of years, and then went back to be full-time in academia and take training students and registrars and vets and Baira, but he'll be spending some of his time with us at clinics at Dr. S.K. Matsiki Memorial Hospital. And so it's a great pleasure to welcome you back, and also as a speaker this evening, Prof. Ally. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bila, and good evening, colleagues, friends. I see there are 241. I can't remember having a meeting with 240 participants. So this is probably your usual and get nothing to do with me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, also it's a topic of interest. But they also want to see your face. And now we haven't seen you in a long time. So it's see if that gray hair has grown or not.
Gray hair has grown a lot. Anyway, thank you guys for giving up your time on a Thursday to sit out here and listen to iron deficiency. Now, I know last week we were at SAGES, which is our National Society meeting. And a week before that, we also had Train the Trainers, international people out here. So there were two things that I picked up from there. And I think you're all familiar with this. It's the concept of intelligence or memory. And the first one is supposed to be like unconscious incompetent. And then you become consciously incompetent as you're aware of how little you know. And then as you begin to read and you try to improve your knowledge, you become consciously competent. And then eventually you are unconsciously incompetent. That's when you ride your bicycle or drive your car. Iron deficiency has made me go back to consciously incompetent. And that's why I chose this topic for tonight. The second thing is, we are also told that you must never use more than 25 slides and never speak for more than 18 minutes because people fall asleep and they've got nothing to take home. But Dr. Bila told me to speak for an hour and I have 88 slides, so I apologize for that. But in the end, I hope that I will leave you with a few take-home messages. I know you've been asked to, if you want questions, to write it in your chat box, and then you will ask me at the end. But I actually don't mind. I prefer interaction. So if you want to stick out your hand and ask your question, I don't mind, because maybe we can't go back to the slide. But anyway, all right, so here we go. Let's go. This is a typical case, and you all have seen this, obviously. This is a real patient who presented to our unit. She presented with heart failure, obviously, and pallor. This is often what we get called to see. She had no chronic disease, no history of previous hypertension or coronary artery disease or diabetes or anything like that. She has 3 children. The youngest is 12 years old. She reports a normal diet with meat at least 3 times a week. I'm not sure what the meat was. See, I didn't get full detail about that. And she does use alcohol occasionally. Of course, on examination, she was dyspneic and she had evidence of heart failure. And Dr. Bila, maybe next time I'd like to talk about heart failure, because very often the registrars use the word decompensated heart failure, and all they mean is the JVP is elevated and she's got edema and crackles, and that's not correct according to American College guidelines of cardiology. But anyway, she was in cardiac failure, obviously a tachycardia. Blood pressure was fine. Apex was displaced, and he said she had a gallop, but very often when they say there's a gallop and you listen, you never hear the third heart sound properly. But anyway, that's for another discussion. These are just some of the indices you all know that we should do when we're investigating iron deficiency anemia. Hers came back as a hemoglobin of 6.5 with an MCV of 68, a low ferritin, and a low saturation. Obviously, those are the hallmarks of iron deficiency anemia. She had a G-scope, which was really normal, just a small hiatal hernia, and she had a C-scope, which was normal. And obviously, fortunately, we have capsule endoscopy, which was also normal. So it was a bit unusual to find in a woman who was postmenopausal, who had significant iron deficiency and normal endoscopy. I put this slide quickly. Apologize for indulging you. This is just a slide I always show to the student, which is an approach to anemia. I hope you don't mind quickly. And we go by the MCV, so less than 80 is obviously microcytic hypochromic anemia. MCVA above 100, that's macrocytic, and then the normal chromic. And what we use normally is serum iron studies for the small cells, reticulocyte count for the normal chromic. And interesting, whenever I ask the students, how do you assess macrocytic? Because they think about red cells. And in fact, what you have to look is at the neutrophils, because you see segmented neutrophils on a smear. And then you know those are probably true megaloblastic anemias. So it's a simple thing. It's a simple for students, for registrars, easy what they have to do. In iron studies, I prefer to do the serum iron or ferritin, and then together with the percentage of saturation, because that's how you can know for sure. And we'll come back to this afterwards, because transferrin and the binding capacity and hepcidin and liver, that's how you distinguish anemia of chronic disorders. So it's very easy to appreciate iron deficiency anemia and anemia of chronic disorders. The megalocytic anemia, very easy also. You look at those neutrophils, and if they're present, you've got true megaloblastic anemia. And if they're absent, then you have what we call false megaloblastic anemia. And there's a couple of things that are responsible. We've seen a lot of ephedrins and alcohol responsible for the non-typical megaloblastic anemia. And then there is the normal chromic normal. And a lot of patients present with this, obviously. And you use the reticulocyte less than 2%. Those means bone marrow failure. More than 2%, that means peripheral destruction. Okay, that's just a little introduction. So why iron deficiency? I mean, you all have heard about the iron deficiency anemia, and it's like boring. So why again iron deficiency anemia? And I apologize, over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to show you some slides. A lot might be molecular, and I apologize for that, but I'll go through just important things that I want to highlight. So why iron deficiency anemia? Probably because the patient that I showed you, and we've seen many of them like that. So I want to show you the importance of iron in human health. I want to show what the literature shows, besides our data, which I will show you, investigation of obscure GI bleeding, and then raise a question of malabsorption. Okay, so let's start with human health. Now this cartoon, sorry if it's a bit distorted, but I wanted to show you was in 2011, WHO suggested that they want to change by 2025, 50% reduction in the amount of people with anemia. This was in 2011, and they said in 2025, we want to change this by 50%. Okay, you all know this already, but I just want to show you some slides. This is now published recently in 2019 in children. I mean, look at Africa, still with severe anemia, subcontinent of Asia as well, and of course those parts. For all of you who listen to Wagner's boss, sorry, I'm not choosing sides, but he got killed in the aircraft yesterday. As far as women in the reproductive age, 2019, South Africa got a little better, but it's not much better. So in fact, WHO's proposal that by 2025 they want to eradicate iron deficiency anemia, I think is, it's with hindsight, they've made mistakes in how they think iron deficiency anemia occurs. This cartoon is obviously, and you're all familiar with it. So we see people with anemia, the doctor examines her, they call for the gastroscopy, and the gastroscopy shows maybe something or not, and then the patient gets put on oral iron or gets a blood transfusion. And unfortunately, that hasn't helped us. So I'm going to share with you 3 3 articles only, one on iron metabolism. We talk about the pathophysiology and pharmacology of iron, and then iron in the heart particular. And so many times patients are presenting in heart failure and iron, and the intern and the registrar says the anemia precipitated the heart failure. Others say the heart failure is making the anemia, so we don't know what is what there. And then, of course, iron in the CNS. And this is of particular importance in children. There's been so much work now on cognitive disturbance and learning disabilities, and because mothers are anemic and giving birth to babies who are anemic, and nobody knows about this until the kid is in standard 1 or 2, and then they discover he's got an anemia. So I want to show these 3 slides, which I think are important. Okay, just to remind you, obviously porphyrin ring, and then of course heme sits in the middle of this porphyrin ring, and then this is bound together in one myoglobin structure. All right, the oxygen sits in that little cavity in there, and hemoglobin is made up of four rings of myoglobin, and obviously 4 iron molecules sitting in each ring. Sorry, if somebody wants to interrupt, please just stick your hands up, because it's difficult to come back afterwards at the end to show the slides again, so I don't really mind. So the first paper I want to show comes from Germany, actually, and this I've chosen some of the most recent data on this. This is from 2021, and just to show you and highlight to you the importance of serum plasma iron, okay? And this is supposed to be held at 4 milligrams. And it's interesting, when I was younger and as a registrar, I thought anything could happen. But in fact, this is such a tight, I think even tighter than sodium and potassium, iron is watched. And all sorts of things go around to make sure that serum iron stays at 4 milligrams. To remind you, you're all familiar with this. So ferric iron is 3+ and ferrous iron is the 2+. The ferric iron is water insoluble, but it allows it to be bound to proteins, okay? And transferrin is the main one. And this helps with most of the metabolic functions that are happening. On the other hand, the ferrous iron is water soluble, gets absorbed, but it is highly reactive. It releases an oxygen and can take a hydrogen. And therefore, because of this Fenton reaction, a lot of cell damage can happen in the liver, pancreas, heart, CNS, and thyroid. And the type control, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is ferroportin, hepcidin, and the transporters. And I will talk a little bit about them afterwards. Just to show you some of iron and where they are also, besides in hemoglobin and myoglobin, they're also part of a lot of iron sulfur enzymes, and also the other enzymes involved in other metabolic pathways, DNA synthesis, energy synthesis, and then, of course, transferrin and ferritin. This in recent years, since 2007, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, this has been and there has been an abundance of research and literature about that. Gastroenterologists always think HPB and H. pylori are the big thing, but in fact, they are misled. I think iron and iron transporters are a more important thing. The functions of iron as a whole host of it, and a myriad, and I don't want to bore you with it. You can all read the papers on it. It's important in DNA synthesis. Besides the oxygen binding, it plays a role in immune synthesis and many other things. The second one is iron deficiency and heart failure. And for any physician that is on this platform, or anybody who thinks he knows anything about the heart and iron, I would suggest you read this paper. And it's come from the Dutch, obviously, they write. I was in the academic medical center in Amsterdam, and they are unbelievably bright, and the things that they do there are superb. So you can get the reference, obviously, afterwards. Read through the paper. It's a superb paper. This cartoon shows a cardiomyocyte and all the molecular events that happen there. I'm not going to go through it now, but maybe at the end you'll understand something about it. More cardiologists have elucidated the different mechanisms whereby iron is involved, not only in protein synthesis, but how it interferes with cardiac myocytes, how it changes structural and function of the heart muscles, collagen synthesis, electron transport, a whole host of things. I like this cartoon. I'll come back to it, but I just wanted to show you on the heart. So you get, this is iron. Iron plays a role in particularly iron deficiency, cardiac hypertrophy and fibrosis, also altered calcium handling, remodeling, contractile responsiveness, increasing mitral pro-BNP, increase, etc., etc., etc. So by its mechanisms of DNA replacement, mitochondrial dysfunction, etc., the heart is affected in many ways. But it's not only the heart. So it's the kidneys, the liver, the muscle, thyroid gland, the brain. And so iron is actually fascinating. It's almost a little like little vitamin D. There was a time when I was very interested in vitamin D, and everybody said, my mother at that time and my sisters were all taking vitamin D. And in fact, it's been shown that that is false, and maybe that's another presentation for another time. So iron plays a role in the heart, very important, tissue remodeling, and in fact, it plays a role not only in the heart, but also in muscles, and I'll show you why exercise intolerance is impaired and performance behavior, etc. You're all familiar with this. These are all the signs and symptoms. Sorry, I didn't write that. That's symptomatology, but it should also be signs because there are things that you see there. We won't go through that because you all know about that. And the third one is about neuronal function and muscle function, because I think this is very important. How does iron get into the brain? It's thought because of the endothelial cells and the vasculature of the brain, obviously. The exact molecular events, how it crosses over, we're not sure yet, but that's been worked out, I think. There are several pathways that it's involved in. The big things are myelination and neurotransmitters, and both for dopamine and serotonin. And so therefore you can see why cognitive behavior is impaired and motor function. And one of the first things recognized was the restless leg syndrome, which was both a motor as well as a cognitive abnormality based on iron deficiency. Now, it's interesting, a lot of new data where you can highlight iron in the brain has shown that if you look at adults and infants, there are different areas of the brain that highlights where iron is concentrated. For example, in infants, it's mainly in the cognitive area and where personality and education and learning is developed. Whereas in adults, it's more motor. So this is a fascinating area, and I think look forward to what's coming in the future. Muscle metabolism, obviously, it's been shown that it's involved in energy production. And so the CNS is affected, definitely. And so these two are interlinked very often, an important role in cognitive function as well as brain attention, memory, etc. And I think the mistake that we as clinicians and probably obstetricians and pediatricians as well is we've overlooked little infants and how iron deficient they are. And I think maybe that should be eradicated long before we look at adults. The immune system, of course, very, very interesting. And when I studied the microbiome, that was the other passion of mine. We know that organisms need iron to activate them and their virulence, but humans also need iron to help them fight. So when you get infected, there's a kind of a fight between the organism and the human, who's going to get the iron that's available. And these have been identified in RAMP1 and 2, and these are called the cation transporters. It's interesting, I found one study in Somalian nomads, and they found in people that were iron deficiency, when they replaced the iron, it increased their susceptibility to infection by 12%. This was fascinating, which means that the bugs were beating the humans. Unfortunately, it's never been reproduced, so that's taken with a pinch of salt. But it makes sense that organisms also need iron. And there's a whole host of mechanisms, all of them. The important ones is cytokine expression, TNF-alpha, IL-6 and 8. And we know these are the pro-inflammatory cytokines. They help to kill organisms, but they also play a role in the autoimmune diseases and overreactions. We've seen this in COVID now also. So having highlighted some of the physiology in cardiac and of course in neuro, what about investigations that we're all familiar with? Okay, and I like this paper. Anybody who's interested should look at Christine Jimenez and Dub's paper from Vienna. Very practical approach. And in the first slide, they've actually got an algorithm of how to manage iron deficiency anemia. But I've cut that one out and I'll show it in the end in how management should happen. You're all familiar with this. Causes of iron deficiency is diminished intake versus increased demand and then loss. Okay, and I'm not going to go through these things with you. Just to say that I think Helicobacter pylori gastritis plays an important role maybe in our patients because they get a form of atrophic gastritis and achlorhydria. And we know you need acid for iron to be absorbed in the duodenum. And maybe this is a future for research to look at people who are malabsorbing iron if they actually have achlorhydria. That might explain some of the things that are happening there. You're all familiar with this, obviously. And then loss, obviously, gynae, we know, GI, myriad of stuff. And this is where all gastroenterologists get involved in, and we think we're hopefully going to find something and fix something. And in fact, that is not true. There are other causes also. But the exciting cause nowadays is what is called, and I don't want to put the word congenital, it's called iron refractory iron deficiency anemia. And I'll show you some data on that. Okay, so why am I excited about this actually? And this comes because of our own work. One of my fellows, Dr. SM, unfortunately, sorry, Dr. Bila, so I just about retired, so I'm an emeritus professor, sorry, but I still belong to WITS because they've logged me on as a visiting professor, so that's okay. But Sia is my fellow, he's still there now, and we looked at this, and just for definitions, so that he presents a cohort of his patients. All right, for your guys' definitions, obscure GI bleeding is like the patient that we saw. They have recurrent anemia and you don't find a source. Occult is when there is a little bit of blood in the stool or you can find something. And overt bleeding is when they obviously bleed. Yeah, but I mean, it's mainly for obscure GI bleeding. So over 6 months, this is what Sia collected. He scoped 1,442 patients, which is a hell of a lot, but he was a good guy and he did a lot of good work. You can see a quarter of least of them were for iron deficiency anemia. Females, interestingly, more than males, obviously. In the breakdown, if we look at this, these two groups, over 60 and over 40, made up the majority of the cohort. So even at Para, the interns and units are selective in who they send. I think they're cleverer than us. And there was a 15% did fall between 20 and 40. And I think that might be a bit of a waste of time. And even under 20s with now overt bleeding. In terms of the diagnosis by age, I mean, I just wanted to show you that gastroscopy, I think, is pretty hopeless. Because the majority of patients, especially, I mean, if you look at the ages, this was worrying us, that if you looked at over 60, the gastroscope was normal. Gastritis makes up a big portion, and I think that might be H. pylori related, and there's an opportunity there for somebody to do research on iron deficiency and achlorhydria and look at acid absorption of iron. Some erosions, obviously, those are from NSAIDs, and a couple with ulcers. I mean, but not what everybody thinks you're going to get. I mean, and then, of course, we did colonoscopies on those in whom the gastroscopy was negative, and he reported on 540. The breakdown was pretty equal as well. Just for the record, 25 years ago, at SAGES, I presented my 1,000 colonoscopies at that time, 1,000 colonoscopies that I had done. And I'd only found 2% of patients who had abnormalities on the colonoscopy. That means colon cancer or IBD. I think at that time, our population in Soweto was healthier than currently. Anyway, that's just a little comment. In terms of by age, again, we had this group. They formed the biggest group. What did we find? Pretty nothing on many of them, pretty nothing. The older ones did, though, have polyps, diverticular disease, a bit of colitis, a few masses, as I mentioned before. But again, nothing exciting in 540 colonoscopies. We've been lucky at Barra, so we got ourselves a capsule endoscopy, which is POCAM, and I hope I can convince the administrators at Dr. SK that we should get, sorry, I'm punting here, Dr. Miller, because I think this is the future. So capsule is very easy. You swallow it, you get a bowel prep, and you have a monitor on which records. Most transit time is within 5 hours. So the battery lives nowadays are 9 hours, and by the time the capsule goes down, you've pretty much got the whole of your GI tract. What we then sit down, it is recorded, we download it off there, and you have a look at the computer, and you have to go through it afterwards, obviously. These are some of the images that we see. Telangiectasia, polyp, beautiful polyp there in the small bowel, a lot of ulcers and erosions in patients with inflammatory bowel disease. Again, NSAID, this is typical of NSAID ulceration, the satellite lesions, etc. And then diverticular disease in the colon. And that's a normal, beautiful, furry, small bowel, healthy small bowel. So capsule endoscopy, I think, is a worthwhile test. And this is what he found in the majority of patients was pretty normal, pretty normal. So what did SIA confirm? Over the age of 60, most likely to find pathologies, but unless there's evidence of bleeding, it's most likely to be normal. And occasionally those are the things that we find. So even in our cohort then of 1,442 patients, endoscopy was really not helpful. And for a gastroenterologist, I know Dr. Titsi at that time said, Reid, you're going to go out of business, boss. So I said, please send the patients still because the fellows need to learn how to scope. But I think we should be cognizant of this. So why am I giving this talk? I think malabsorption is an interesting concept. And I think that's where we've missed the boat all along. You all know this progression of how you get from iron deposits, then abnormalities, and then red cells, and how you actually get to anemia. And these are just the tests on what you can do when you find true iron deficiency anemia. And this concept we all know about, that you might be iron deficient, but you don't have the anemia. And there's a lot of people walking around which are iron deficient. They don't have anemia yet. The hemoglobin hasn't gone down, but they have abnormalities of many other things, their hearts, their kidneys, their nerves, etc. And so we should look out a little bit more for that. So this comes with a lot of molecular science. Sorry, guys, I apologize for this. You don't have to be worried about all of them, but it's new. This is exciting, and I think this is maybe where it's going to go to. This is a paper recently by Michael Knudsen. I say recently, even though it's 2017, but it's been expanded. And in this paper, he identifies all the transporters that are involved. There's a whole host of them. I will mention a few later on, but it's been identified. Can you imagine all these transporters being important in iron metabolism? This is crazy. Not even sodium has got such tight control. Thyroid, all we know is TSH, T3, T4, and a couple of things like that. Can you imagine this in iron absorption and metabolism? I think this is an important slide from him quickly. And what I will show you, and I'll spend a few slides on talking about iron here. The iron that we get, obviously, that we ingest is heme iron, which is meat. And I think a lot of the things, and I'll show you one paper which came from India because of the vegans there, and especially the non-meat eaters. And you can get iron from non-heme, but it's not well absorbed. And so non-heme iron, unfortunately, makes up 90% of our diet, and 10% is heme. And I think that's why a lot of people like bunting, they say chow a lot of meat and forget about the carbohydrates, which maybe they know something about iron metabolism. So heme iron is absorbed directly, only unfortunately 10%. They're both 3 pluses. Remember, they're both 3 plus in the top when they are starting off. And heme is absorbed by what is called a heme regulated gene 1 directly. This is in the enterocytes. Non-heme iron, this is 3 plus, has to be reduced first by a cytochrome B, which then changes it to 2 plus, and this gets absorbed by DMT1. This was discovered, this enzyme, in 2008, and this is the first time we understood how iron gets into the body. So at this time, it is the heme is a 2+ here. When it comes out from here, it's still 3+, but for it to be metabolized, it has to get into ferroportin, which is a 2+ again, and there it can attach to ferritin. So there's another enzyme which is important here, and I know you're all familiar with it. It's called hephestin, and this is a ferrooxidase which converts the 3+ into a 2+, because it's the only way it can get out of the cell and attach to transferrin. Okay, so these two are important to remember, DMT1 and HRG1, and a couple of things inside the cells. This in another cartoon show it exactly the same, but what I want to show you here is not only hephestin, which is a ferrooxidase, and ferroportin, which allows for the heme to come out. But the big boss, and when I was a registrar, I didn't know about this, but the big boss is actually hepcidin. And I think a lot of the registrars now, and even students and interns know about this, is that hepcidin is the traffic controller. And it does everything, and it shows us when to stop and when not to do. But the problem is something can go wrong with hepcidin as well. This is complicated, and I'm not going to go again, but just to, this is a nice cartoon showing hepcidin in red. So again, showing that hepcidin is the big put. This is from the same paper still. In normal people, and remember, hepcidin comes from the liver. When you have normal hepcidin and you have normal iron, you will get proper absorption. Yeah, oh, sorry, there, my mouse is not going very well. Yeah, sorry. But when you have, especially in interesting anemia, when you have iron deficiency, you actually want to switch off hepcidin, because hepcidin stop iron from absorption. And therefore it is a negative controller. And you actually, in people with iron deficiency anemia, hepcidin should be reduced dramatically, but very often hepcidin is overproduced in people with anemia of chronic disorders, and therefore the hepcidin is elevated and you have low levels of iron. On the other hand, in hemochromatosis, where there's diseases of the liver as well, you get low hepcidin and you get iron overload. So in fact, the new theory of investigation is not only iron, but to be able to measure hepcidin. And I think that will be the future. The test that you're going to be doing is hepcidin. Sorry, I took this from the text directly. Hepcidin is the master regulator. And at molecular level, hepcidin inhibits iron binding to the surface and ferroportin. And on the other hand, in patients with iron deficiency, the body seeks to return iron balance achieved by down-regulating expression of hepcidin. And this should happen. This should happen. So if we, in the future, doing tests for iron deficiency anemia, we're going to be doing tests and measuring hepcidin. So why is this big noise? Why am I showing you all of this? One of the things that came out in 2022 was, this was published from India, obviously, and said, listen, guys, maybe we're looking at this at wrong. So in fact, maybe iron deficiency is not a blood loss, but in fact, maybe it's a malabsorption. Because remember, a lot of, especially in India, most of them are vegans, and they're eating non-heme iron. So what is iron refractory iron deficiency anemia? And this word has suddenly come a buzz. And I have a sense that if we are honest as registrars and as consultant junior, how many of our patients with iron deficiency go home with packets and packets of iron? I mean, hundreds of, and they come back and in 2 or 3 months' time, the iron is still low, and then we blame them and we say, yeah, iron probably was burning your stomach and therefore you never, and we shout them. But in fact, maybe it's got nothing to do with them not taking their iron, but maybe they've got something else wrong with them. And this paper by Fang looked at the global prevalence and ethnic heterogeneity of iron refractory iron deficiency anemia. So what is this about? Okay, so something new again, this was known about this in 2009 already, was the regulators of iron homeostasis. And this this little protein is called matriptase 2 or TMPRSS6. And in fact, what it does is, in this cartoon, this is the controller of hepcidin. So it's almost like T3 and TSH. So there's a fine control. When you need to switch it off, this enzyme goes up and it stops hepcidin going. But if there's a problem with this, obviously the hepcidin comes out, a lot of hepcidin flowing around, blocks iron absorption, and therefore you get low serum iron. And they looked at and thought about, is iron deficiency actually an abnormality of TMPRSS6? And in fact, so what they've looked at is looking at the genomic genes that regulate for the expression of this enzyme. And lo and behold, obviously nowadays, because everything is GWAS and we can look at genes, you get polymorphisms of these genes. And therefore, you get aberrations in a non-functioning protein which doesn't control hepcidin. So as I've showed you, you have to switch off. Theoretically, if you're iron deficient, you want to switch off hepcidin so that you can get absorption of iron. However, maybe because the enzyme that controls it is not working, there's a lot of hepcidin which stops us from absorbing iron. So in fact, this was from this paper. This is a transmembrane protein, and the hallmark of is microcytic anemia, low transferrin, high serum values. And in fact, they went so far and they looked at it. And now we know that people with what is called iron-resistant iron deficiency anemia most likely have got aberrations, polymorphisms, abnormal of these genes and these proteins. And in this paper, sorry for this cartoon again, in fact, there's a lot of data showing that even hepcidin, there's abnormalities of hepcidin, genetic mutation in all the signaling going through in there. I took this and sorry, just cut out some of them. There are interethnic variations in the genes involved metabolism associated with low iron status have been conducted in European and Asia, and one study conducted in South Africa, we cannot report on it yet, on Black African females, and in our study, a higher prevalence of iron deficiency anemia compared to other ethnic groups. We cannot explain if this is attributed to dietary factors or actually genetic abnormalities, and further genomic studies have to be done. And in fact, so what happens now is, Sia, I hope, but unfortunately I'm not there, but maybe we can do this even if somebody wants to come forward at Dr. SK or in clinics. We started on a study. We took healthy volunteers versus patients with iron deficiency anemia. We gave them radioactive labeled oral iron and measured how much was coming out in their poo, obviously. So we know that if you give somebody 14 grams, normally most of it comes out. You absorb one milligram really. That's what you should be absorbing. So we can calculate how much should be coming out if you're really absorbing. But if you're dumping all of that you're taking orally, we know you are malabsorbing. So in fact, maybe the problem is malabsorption rather than something wrong with taking oral. We also took blood for GWAS screening to look for polymorphisms in these regulatory proteins. Unfortunately, I hope this is part of his PhD, and he is from where's East London? He's from there, but he was sent by a private clinic there, LifeMed, and his contract is up in October or November. And I said, Sia, don't worry about your contract, boss. Do this work, and maybe if you win the Nobel Prize, the money from LifeMed doesn't matter anymore. But I hope he continues and does the work. But my guess is, in the end, he will have to go back. But maybe we can do this even at Lesedi Clinic. So, suggested management. What have I told you about? And this comes from Christine Jimenez's paper. And the first slide is this algorithm. So in fact, what they suggested is when you diagnose IDH, you must replace iron. And in fact, not oral, because it's a waste of time. You have to give intravenous iron. And that's how you can replenish the iron. And only then, if the patient still drops his hemoglobin, then you can look for invasive causes like endoscopy, etc. And of course, if it corrects the iron, maybe you'll be all right instead of giving oral iron. Look, having said there's a lot of people that do absorb iron. I have no problem with that, but I still think there's a majority of people that are malabsorbing iron. In terms of oral iron, there are pros. Remember this, it's effective when endoscopy is not impaired. This is very important, and it's limited because of a few things. And I think a lot of our patients, I know at Barra, I can tell you, the biggest selling drug is a PPI at Barra. I mean, every month it's out of stock. There was a time when I investigated it and you could sell Lanzo or Losec in Soweto for $20. It was going better than buying a tablet of Tuck or whatever it is, because the PPIs for dyspepsia, for heartburn, even for mental function. So there are cons. And I think for all those patients taking PPIs, they get achlorhydria and they're malabsorbing iron. Intravenous irons, I think in the olden days of allergic reaction, I think nowadays that's out of, it has safe formulations. And at Barra, we've instituted that most people, especially between the ages up to 50, get iron infusions before they get referred for endoscopy. I'm not saying that's what we have to do. I'm coming back to Lesedi, so hopefully you'll send me a couple of patients for endoscopy before you transfuse them with iron. But there are cons as well. So, in a nutshell, sorry, I showed you a lot of slides, and I haven't done bad for my time. Some important message. Iron is an essential nutrient, very important, plays a bigger role than just oxygen carrying. In terms of iron absorption, because of the molecular biology, I think there's a bigger role of malabsorption. Now, I know that I didn't go through the causes, Whipple's disease and all sorts of other diseases. Celiac is a big one. And I hope that all the physicians, if you have patients with iron deficiency, are looking at celiac the bloods to look for tissue transglutaminase, etc. Very important. Non-heme iron, I think it's a no-no. So for all the vegans, I apologize. It is worse, terribly absorbed. You need the DMT1 enzyme and ferroportin, and very often I believe there are genetic polymorphisms of those genes, and maybe that's why you're not absorbing heme iron. So have a nice bite of liver every now and then. It's full of iron, and I think that's good for you. Elderly patients must still be investigated. As we've shown, most of the time they have disease. Endoscopy, as Sia showed, I mean, out of 1,400 patients, the yield was only 14%. So most of the international literature will tell you that endoscopy will yield 30%. But that means in 70%, you still have no explanation of why they are iron deficient. I think capsule endoscopy is the future with more sophisticated ProCams. It's a much easier test. All you have to do is swallow a little camera. And your patients find it quite interesting, actually, when you tell them there's a little camera moving through your gut. They like that. And then I think the future should be, we should change the paradigm, maybe that oral iron replacement should be exchanged for intravenous iron replacement. And it should be for the first part of your algorithm. And that's it. Thank you very much, guys. I got through 90 of my slides in, I think, 45 minutes. So thank you, Dr. Bila, everybody.
That was great. You scared me when you said you have slides, so many slides. It's going to take you an hour. But I think you did well to cover all those slides in that short space of time. And quite engaging in terms of content and information that you provided. And as you indicated, there's a lot more that you wish to discuss with us. One of the first questions, it's someone who says, "Hi, Prof, I've been diagnosed with severe anemia and I'm taking ferritin. Is it a good supplement?"
Iron deficiency anemia? Or what kind of anemia?
Just as severe anemia, no further information given.
Well, that's why I showed in the first slide, you have to look at the anemia. Is it iron deficient? Is it normochromic? Is it macrocytic? There are different treatments for it. So if you are iron deficiency, true, and you've been taking iron tablets in the algorithm, you must check after 4 months. If the hemoglobin does not go up, then you are malabsorbing the iron. You are wasting your money and swallowing rubbish tablets for nothing. So to whoever asked the question, look at the first slide and look at your size of your cells. If you are truly small, then you can be iron deficiency or anemia of chronic disorders, and that's the route you must follow.
Okay. And they are free to contact you, and maybe if whoever is looking after them may contact you so that maybe they discuss further.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
No problem.
So you said you just indicated that you now with Dr. SK. That's the
yes. I will.
So
I've been faffing around because last week was the SAGES and the week before was the World Endoscopy Training. But from the 1st of September, I'll have full-time on the ground. I'll be there with Puleng and hopefully, sure.
So they can phone the hospital if they want to get an appointment with you. Yeah, Dr. Thompson is our regular. Clyde Thompson wants to know, is capsule endoscopy routinely done in state hospitals? As you're advocating for that to be used?
Well, that's an interesting question. So in a state, we have to train our fellows, and that's an ethical question. Sorry, Dr. Thompson. Is that his name? Yeah. So
no, it's Green Thompson.
Green Thompson. Okay. So
not like Green Thompson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we still have fellows to train, we still perform endoscopy. So my answer to that is capsule is available, but it's not our first line. Because we still have to train our fellows to do endoscopy, and therefore we go through the routine of gastroscopy, colonoscopy, and then capsule endoscopy. If you're asking me this in private practice, or where a patient who says, listen, doc, I don't really want to have a G-scope and a C-scope, sure, go ahead and do capsule endoscopy. I think it's a superb test, and it gives you exactly the same answers. Obviously, if you find something, you have to go back with a scope and remove whatever it is. But it is available. Yeah.
Okay. Then Jennifer Corin Hull wants to know, what is the place of erythroferron in this whole mechanism?
Sorry, the role of?
I'm not sure. Erythroferron in this whole mechanism.
Interferon.
Yeah, but they put erythroferron. I don't know if it's
erythropoietin. I think
that's what they wanted to say, but they've written erythroferron.
Erythropoietin obviously comes from the renals, from the kidneys, and that makes red cells. That's got nothing to do with iron. So you can get anemia from deficiency of erythropoietin, and we see that in people with chronic kidney disease. As you remember from your young days, in all the patients with renal failure, they get anemia, but that anemia is multifactorial. One of it is erythropoietin, but erythropoietin is the programming for red cells, not for the myoglobin and the hemoglobin and the iron. So it doesn't necessarily cause iron deficiency anemia, but it causes anemia, multi-nutritional anemia.
Yeah, and then they make a comment about anaphylaxis, that this is a...
That's gone. Doesn't happen anymore. With the dextrose attached to it, we have not seen one single allergic reaction anymore.
Yeah, because they confirmed that they say they've only seen one reaction in more than 100 patients that they've put this patient.
Look, I can't say it never happens because there'll always be somebody allergic, but it is as safe as eating sardines, which you can get in anaphylaxis, or prawns, or anything else. So I wouldn't be worried about it.
Yeah. And someone apologizes for joining late, says, how do we diagnose malabsorption of iron? Maybe you've gone through that, but I'm sure for their benefit to those who might have joined late.
The simple answer is, if your patient is iron deficient, if you have a true patient with iron deficiency, you've done the test, you've measured the serum iron and the ferritin and percentage saturation, give them oral iron for 4 months. Repeat the test. If the iron is still low, that patient is malabsorbing iron. And please send them to us. We can do GWAS screening for gene polymorphisms. Dr. Bila, you're going to help me. We're going to set this up at Lesedi, and I mean at Dr. SK, And we're going to...
Dr. Kinosha is here also, is listening. We'll talk about that. I'm sure we may have to have an appointment with you and talk about the quite innovative ways of managing patients on deficiency. Yeah, sure. I think we'll set up that appointment and have a chat. And there's a question, Dr. Mahlang, what is the place of IV treatment? One of the of eye treatment, I think there's, I'm not sure if it's Genova, Venova, etc. Is there any place for that? You spoke about that sometimes it's a waste of time to give oral iron, but now IV treatment.
Yes, that's why I put there. I think in the algorithm, IV iron replacement is the first part of the algorithm. It is you're giving ferrous, it forms Fe3+, which is attached to protein, it goes to the liver, and it's very useful. It gets incorporated into hemoglobin and in all the metabolic pathways that I've mentioned. So for me, IV iron replacement is the answer for simplicity. It's one infusion of 500 milligrams of iron, and your patient is cured.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Jennifer Carol Hull, Dr. Hull. You indicate that you spoke about erythropoietin, but she says that erythropoietin. If we talk about that, you want to unmute yourself, Dr. Hull, and ask your question.
Please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you very well. Yeah.
I'm just so pleased to hear my great guy that I admire, Prof. Ally. It's so good to hear you.
Jenny,
just
how?
2 comments.
Is that Jenny, how?
Yes.
Hi. How are you, Jenny? Oh, okay.
Right. I'm missing you guys. I'm missing the whole thing. But the comment with the intravenous iron dextran is that we never, ever saw an anaphylaxis. We had acute reactions in 1 in 100, and especially when the iron is running too rapidly. And that was the point with that. Okay. That was, and the other thing I see someone's asked about is how do you manage pica in the pregnant patients? And it's highly, so many people are doing it, especially with these little things they buy at the taxi ranks. They buy clay and they eat it. And you have to explain to them that they're going to, and sometimes it doesn't work, that they might as well throw the iron in the toilet along with the clay. So you counsel them and you speak to them, and if it's not going, then you move to intravenous iron. And the other thing was, thank you so much for answering, but it was erythroferrone, which, as you say, is stimulated by erythropoietin, and that actually pushes everything up like in thalassaemics. So thank you so much for your lecture. It was so nice to hear you again.
Thanks, Jenny. It was good to see you and hear you.
Thanks,
you're absolutely.
So it's good to be connecting people at these webinars.
Yeah. So pica, just as a comment quickly, is an interesting phenomenon. I left it out particularly because the molecular pathways, so we know that iron deficiency anemia in fact stimulates pica, and it's maybe not the other way around, that pica causes iron deficiency, although it's one of the things that inhibits iron absorption. But there's evidence that iron deficiency by its pathways actually stimulate the sensation in the cognitive brain area to wanting to eat funny things. So I think it's a bidirectional thing. But Jenny, in the end, you're right. Just infuse iron, hip hip hooray, everybody's happy.
I think the drain is that they're seeing iron because it's in the metal, but it's the wrong type of iron.
It's the wrong,
could have just explained to them. It's a
Correct,
very important finding that they all have pica. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks for that comment, Dr. And Ubafemo Yatade wants to know, what is the next line of action in idiopathic deficiency anemia?
Infuse them. So the whole thing in India, that's a beautiful study. So obviously, if you take vegans, and I think the same will happen here in South Africa, if we take vegans, they might not have anemia, but they're iron deficient. And I can bet they have a lot of abnormalities in neurotransmitters, in cardiac function. I'm not saying that's why sportsmen drop dead, but there might be explanations. I think the most fascinating paper is cardiac dysfunction. I mean, I never knew, so intensely iron in the heart. But coming back, I think what we should be doing is, I know you can't commercially buy IV iron, but I think the way to eradicate, and I think that's what WGO has got wrong, or WHO, oral iron replacement is not the panacea. Endoscopy is not the panacea, but you have to replace the iron stores in the body at a young age. And even if, I hope there's a pediatrician there on the platform, but pediatricians should infuse iron, and that's how little infants will develop better.
Okay, thanks for that. And then what about intramuscular iron option? Is that an option?
I don't know about it so much about intramuscular. I think you know, there are some couple companies that are doing that, but it used to be painful, but intravenous is a quick thing. It's better than the blood transfusion. It's a little 200 ml bag. You can infuse it over 2 hours, and the patient goes home after that. Of course, it's almost like the biologics, and Jenny would know, in patients with inflammatory bowel disease that are pregnant, and other people, that we have patients who come in for their infliximab regularly, in patients with Crohn's, or rituximab for rheumatoid. Patients who need it come in, and they get their infusion. We've got fortunately at Barra, on the first floor, we've got a nice infusion center. We've put up a television. And so while you're getting your infusion of either your biologic or your iron, you can watch the television. I'm not sure if they're still showing the regular soapies or sports or whatever, but you can have infusion centers.
Yeah. And we're coming back to iron infusion. How soon after the first iron infusion can we repeat blood test, and how often can we do iron infusion in a patient with iron deficiency? And thirdly, what are the various products available in the market for IV infusion?
Number one, the question to number one is, normally after 1 month, you should check the iron levels. After you've infused 500 milligrams, it should be settled down. But remember, your normal gut also, you lose iron normally because you're secreting cells. And so, but in theory, what we've seen is a normal infusion and normal hemoglobin can last you maybe up to a year. And then you need to check it again, and maybe those patients will become iron deficient again. The one that we have at Barra is Venofarm, but there are a few commercially. I don't know, I'll ask Tikaledi if she can tell me, but we have Venofarm currently. That's all I know, Dr. Bila. I don't know what you guys have at SK, but there are many, there are several.
Okay, yeah.
Can I
and now often can, okay,
yes, Jen.
Okay, in pregnancy we're using Cosmofer. It's not as quick as the others, but it gives you can give up to much bigger dose in one go. When you've got pregnant patients, they cannot come back every 2 weeks or whatever. So it's got a set amount that's worked on grams per kilogram. And it's very useful. I haven't used any of the other modern irons, but we gave up on Venofarm because the patients had to come back so many times to get their complete dose. And to answer one of the other people, to get the complete dose of iron, it's based on the body weight and the hemoglobin. But thank you. You can use Cosmofer. It works very nicely. It's available at Barra. Okay, thank you.
Can you comment about malabsorption with pregnancy? Maybe there's somebody who allowed still, whilst we still have you, and how often should they get it, and from what gestational age?
Jenny, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think that's what.
Pregnancy and malabsorption.
I've seen malabsorption sometimes, and usually it's because they respond to oral iron. And when they're not absorbing, you go and do the full iron studies. And I learned the hard way that you don't just do the ferritin. You do all the iron studies. I love what these guys do with the transferrin saturation, because you can get the ferritin going up. And I've actually had one patient, which I should have written up, who had some block somewhere or other, and her ferritins were 0, transferrin saturation was increased. Everything looked like classical iron deficiency, but when we did the full iron studies, her iron levels were through the sky, and her transferrin saturation was over 80. So we eventually ended up having to transfuse her. So there are all sorts of things.
Okay, thanks for that, Dr. Hall.
Thank you.
It's good collaboration tonight. And Prof. Ali, back to you. Would it be correct to diagnose a patient as iron deficient if on iron studies they only have an abnormality, the only abnormality is a low ferritin, and the red blood cell is normal, the hemoglobin is normal, transferrin is normal, and serum iron levels are also normal.
Saturation?
Nothing mentioned about the saturation here.
Normally, saturation is above 35. When it goes down in the grades, and there's a nice graph on it on one of the slides. So you have iron measurement alone doesn't give you iron deficiency. You have to look at saturation because it's got to do with transferrin. And transferrin and hepcidin comes from the liver. I think the test in the future is going to be iron, transferrin, percentage saturation, and hepcidin. And then you can diagnose iron deficiency. But on iron alone, low levels with normal transferrin and normal percentage saturation, I wouldn't treat them with iron.
Yeah, and the test is Cidaol versus Ferrimet. Which one is better?
Repeat that. Ferrimet versus
Cidaol, I don't know.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with these. Sorry, Dr. Bila. Private, I'm not sure what they are in private. Sorry, somebody must help. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe Dr. Tsetsi would share more about this, or maybe send you follow this up with you that we can have more information about what it is. Yeah.
I don't know what the ones are available in private.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. And Dr. Keda, what is the oldest age you would consider IV infusion to be still a pediatric treatment? I don't know if you also dare get into that scope of pediatrics.
I must say, I used to call Christine Angenicolo or one of my other pediatric colleagues. I know currently, you all know who's the big boss. He was in the news. But sorry, I'm skipping the question, and I leave
not your field. So, Doc, I think maybe we might have to call a pediatrician sometime in the future.
Yes.
Yeah. And Dr. Oyatadi, from your experience and expertise, how often do you encounter IV dextran anaphylaxis-related transfusion reaction? Again,
as I've said, from the years that we've used it now, probably over the past 8 years, I haven't heard of any reactions.
Yeah. Looks like we've got a lot to talk about IV infusion tonight. For nurses,
I think because I'm changing the subject from oral iron to IV iron. I think that's why. So,
yeah,
so that's why the questions will come at IV iron, because there was something so easily available, oral iron. You can hand it out at the taxi rank. But the bottom line, the truth is, oral iron does not get absorbed, and it causes a lot of GI problems. So I'll come back again. It might take a while to change. One of the things that we learned at Train the Trainers, besides giving short lectures, is that take home some messages and change your practice. So I think this might take a while, but I think oral iron is not the panacea to fix iron deficiency anemia. Not at all.
Yeah,
because they are
okay. Dr. Malek, also at antenatal clinic, can nurses give the IV infusion at clinic level?
Jenny, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I'll answer it for you. Yeah, the nurses put it up. I usually get the guys to do, because we're still using Cosmofer, I make sure that the patients sign a complete thing, because the problem is too, with your HIV positive patients, it's going to cause a transient increase in the viral load. So we have the nurses watching it, but usually the doctors put it up. And I haven't had the experience or the privilege to use Monofer, but it's made by the same people who made Cosmofer. And so they use the same dose to get the total dose infusion. There's a maximum that you can give. And our nurses are involved in the ward with it. We used to do it in the outpatients, but there are areas where they're doing it like that. And I think, I didn't know that Prof has got an iron deficiency a place where you're watching the TV. It sounds fantastic. All right. But we used to keep them in for it because of the reactions. All right. Does that answer it?
Yes. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I think we need to have you, Dr. Hall. we'll get hold of you. Give it
Obviously, the reason is because of pediatrics and gynae. And I mean, we're talking about women, which makes up, in our cohort, 60% of the investigations patients were females. So absolutely, that's the cohort. It's a pity there's no psychiatrist here or pediatrics.
There is. We do have psychiatrists. You want them to comment?
Yeah, I mean, what about cognitive dysfunction and especially pediatrics?
I'll put one of them on the spot. Yeah, he never
put one of them on the spot. Yeah,
Professor Reidwaan, you want to comment? I think I saw you joining in.
He might have signed off.
Yeah, today he wants.
Can I make a comment there with your thing with pediatrics? It doesn't matter. If you comment on what's happening with the baby in utero, that is the time that you get the baby's iron up, because it's very difficult to convert that iron deficiency in the first few months of pregnancy. So it's vitally important that we actually get these patients to be iron replete by the time they deliver. And they actually have increased postpartum hemorrhage and all sorts of other stuff, including what you've mentioned with the heart and the uterine contraction. But I don't know if that's going to answer you. So it gives you a lot of, it helps the babies by giving the iron in the antenatal period.
Okay.
This last question that we have, hopefully it is the last question. Dr. Katawaro, I use Monofar and Ferinject in private. Is it a total dose infusion? Is it more effective than Benafar or Cosmofar? Were you so excited? Is it about, you know, the person? Sorry, I can't hear you.
It's a calculated dose. You have to use the hemoglobin.
Okay.
Anyway, I see I've stimulated iron infusion. So maybe another talk should be on that, actually. We can get a round table with pediatrics, neurologists, and cardiologists.
Yeah, we'll do that. I think it's a good idea. We'll do that. Certainly do that. Will give us some time to organize such a roundtable discussion. So we've had a wonderful chat here, and I think there's much more that we can talk about. As you've just indicated, we have other disciplines that we can involve in this exciting discussion.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Dr. Kenoshi, I heard your voice, and from clinics as a chief of operations, just to, it's just sent me a message. Yeah, we'll have a chat with him, Prof. Ally, to organize a meeting, have a chat with him about your suggestions and also the other team members. But just to thank you for availing yourself, and we're glad that you're part of us now as clinics. You also bring that expertise, that academic insight into clinical management in the private sector. Which I think would have a wonderful time of interaction with other colleagues within the team, not only physicians, but also pediatricians and obstetricians. And we also mentioned psychiatrists. So that will be a wonderful combination. So just want to thank you for that time that you've given us tonight. And as you've indicated, there's much more that you want to discuss with us at a later stage.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks. Also want to thank those who joined us. Dr. Hall, thank you for the interaction. Also, as I indicated, we will definitely get in touch with you for future topics and discussions. And also to thank all our colleagues who participated in making this discussions quite exciting because of your interactions and to your desire to know more about clinical medicine and improve the quality of care for all the patients that you see, whether in the public or the private sector. And also the numbers are indicating that it's a good platform that we're having to engage you on this webinars. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to have you again joining us the next week and the week after, the weeks thereafter. Also to thank Kamu for being there together with the partnership that we have, making sure that we bring these topics and discussions on a weekly basis, and the whole marketing team. Thank you very much. And to Clinics Health Group for allowing us to have this time every week on a Thursday evening. And just for me to say, may you have a good evening, and till next time. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Ray.
Good night, Hoops. Thanks for joining us every week. We must talk about GPs also, GP practice. You put together a presentation.
I wanted to ask you, I've got somebody who's got a lot of experience. He's a physician, would be very good for HIV and TB.
I'll call it just now when we log up. I'll call it just immediately.
Okay.
Sure.